The G20 is responsible for nearly 80% of all CO2 emissions. Climate investment is a smart investment. A climate unsmart investment is essentially a sure thing to a bankrupt company and a bankrupt planet.
Welcome to this episode of Sustainability Karma. I'm your host, Rajiv Tikoo. Today we have a very special guest with us, Inger Andersen. She is the Executive Director of United Nations Environment Program, or UNEP. We talked to her about the upcoming World Environment Day, which falls on June 5th. Welcome, Inger Andersen, to the show of Sustainability Karma.
It's my pleasure.
What was the thought behind choosing this year's theme of land restoration, desertification, and drought resilience?
Yeah, you're right. It's a big theme, right? It has everything. But when we think about it, land is life. 40% of the population in this world is impacted by land degradation. We are losing around 12 million hectares of degraded land every year. And so this really detracts from our GDP. It detracts from people's well-being. And right now we have about nearly 2.5 billion people living with water stress. And so that reality means that we need to restore the land, because land is life. When we restore it, then it will increase the rainfall. When we restore it, it will increase the absorptive capacity. So we will not have the kind of flooding. When we restore it, we will have cleaner air. When we restore it, we will have places to take our children. So restoration is good for nature and good for people.
The theme is quite overwhelming as compared to last year's or even the next year's theme, focus on plastic, which has a great traction actually. So how challenging are you finding to rally various stakeholders, particularly the corporate sector?
Well, I guess what our message to business is: restore your corner of the world. Look at your supply chains. If you're an agricultural company, figure out how you can do planet friendly. Are you planet friendly or are you planet destructive? Think about sustainable farming. And a lot of great work has been done in that in India. Think about how you can improve soil quality, organic, composting, irrigation techniques, all of these things, rainwater and freshwater harvesting, and so on. Because we just cannot continue to lose our lands. And that is good business. That's the thing, right? If our land is vibrant and productive and nutrient full, then obviously we will have a greater harvest. We will have healthier products. We will use less chemicals. So we will have cleaner water. And so we shouldn't be throwing money away. Land is life. And that's really what this World Environment Day is about. It's about all stakeholders, getting everybody involved, including businesses, of course.
Land is life sounds very interesting and very catchy also. But how do you sum up the performance of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration?
So we are halfway through this decade or so. And that decade really aims to prevent, to halt, and to reverse land degradation. And that's really important. And we've had a great start. We've seen about 1 billion hectares now under active restoration. That's a size of China, more or less. But every square inch matters. And so India, I should mention that the Indian Namami Ganga initiative, which was a flagship and launched in 2023, is also progressing. Now, this doesn't happen overnight, but the government has invested around $4 billion. There are 230 organizations involved, some 370 kilometers already restored, much work to be done, of course. And every inch matters. And here I just want to say that I live in Nairobi, as you mentioned, and I live in Nairobi, and here we have an urban forest. And so all urban forests are critical because they protect our people. They are preventing seasonal floods. They have biodiversity. They provide cleaner air and breathing and recreation. So the kind of urban forests that we have around Mumbai, like the Aarey forest, the forest that we have here, the Karura forest or the Central Park, all of these matters because they protect people and protect our environment.
And what is your understanding of the achievements on the SDGs related to environment?
So, of course, you will not be surprised to hear that since I work on environment, I think that environment runs through all of the SDGs, because how can we have healthier people without environment? How can we have high food production without environment? How can we have all these other outcomes, justice, etc., without a healthy environment? And so we feel that environment is absolutely the foundation of everything to do with the achievements of the SDGs. But the trouble is that only 15% of the SDGs globally are on track. And so what we have to do much more about is to think about the footprint that we have. And here, I really want to salute Mission Life, the Life initiative that India launched during the G20, and which really talks about, can we walk more gently on this earth? Can we live in harmony with nature? Can we live and find healthy and sustainable ways of living? And this is something that India has really pushed, and very helpfully so, sustainable lifestyles, which encourages actions and empowers citizens to really make more informed choices, not the take, make, and throw away, but more modest and more circular living. And this is very important. And that issue, unsustainable consumption and production, is really at the core of many of our environmental crises: pollution, loss of biodiversity, obviously climate change. So we think that action on environment will help deliver all of the SDGs, but action will also, frankly, make for much better lives and much better sustainability in balance with nature.
India has been also celebrating the success of its SDG, water and sanitation. Now, how do you look at it?
I mean, this was a major activity, and I think here to really see that campaign that was made on open defecation, and really see the campaign that was made in many villages on ensuring healthier and appropriate and sanitized conditions. Look, we are all humans, and our bodies function the way that they have to. And so the more we can invest in sanitation, the better we will be. And we've seen a massive move forward in India under this campaign. And I really salute that, because, and I've seen some extraordinary things. I saw pictures, and my colleagues were telling me, my Indian colleagues telling me about signs in villages saying, we will not make our daughters marry into villages that still practice open defecation. So it's magnificent kind of a campaign at real grassroots. And what we have seen, therefore, with the investments, with the campaigns, with the popular mobilization, is something that I think India can be incredibly proud of.
But so what's your sense about India's performance on SDGs in general?
I think we're seeing India really seeking to focus and on the environment. I think we are on track. India is on track on SDG 12 on sustainable consumption and production, which is really good. I mentioned around the sustainable consumption and production and SDG 12, and of course on the issue of water supply and sanitation. On the sanitation side, as just discussed, India has made a massive push forward. India has also started a significant restoration program. So we are really seeing a significant mobilization of this government towards the SDGs. And that's obviously something that we very much celebrate.
When you talk about climate action, despite putting in so many efforts, we're still falling short. Now, what would be your prescription for accelerating action?
Well, first of all, the big emitters, and here I am speaking about the G20, but obviously those with the longest historical trail to move first. And that means like the OECD part of G20, but it will take everyone to really lean in, because the G20 is responsible for nearly 80% of all CO2 emissions. So if those 20 countries, especially those with the long historical trails, make those moves, actually we will see a significant impact. It is not Vanuatu that is causing this problem. It is not the Gambia or Kenya. It is the big emitters. And so that is a big move that needs to happen. And it has to be expedited. And you could argue, and the Secretary General of the United Nations does, that countries that have that can afford, wealthier countries, they should try to make the net zero before 2050 to make room for the poorer countries that have a large emission load, so that they can have a little more bracket to get to where they need to get to by 2050 or thereabouts. But the road to COP29 in Azerbaijan is really critical, because at COP29, the new, what we refer to as NDC, these promises that we make
Right.
to each other, national determined contributions, where we say, my country, we're promising that the next 5 years, we're going to make that stretch. Those NDCs now have to be more ambitious, and they have to be aligned with investment plans so that it's not just talk on a page, but that we are actually lining up behind it. And we saw at the recent G20 meeting pledges to end coal at home. We saw action on land restoration, and we saw action on renewable energy. It's a good start. Now it's the G20's turn, and I'll be there for those meetings. But of course, it does need everyone, everywhere, businesses, societies, investors, governments, etc., all across the world. We don't have a lot of time, and the poorest people will suffer. That's the people in the global south, but we all have something to do.
You refer to OECD countries. They've been also defaulting on extending financial assistance for now decades. So what is the way forward here?
So, I recall COP15 back in Copenhagen.
Right.
We agreed that by 2020, there shall be 100 billion per year for climate investments, etc. Now, COVID came, and so we didn't quite make it. So by 2023, I think that's when we finally made the 100 billion. But of course, in the meantime, that bill has gone up because we have climate procrastinated more or less globally. And so, yes, it was good to get the loss and damage fund. And yes, we've got $700 million now in the fund. But it is dwarfed by what we know the costs will be. We just look at Pakistan and the floods there, or just look at other countries. Brazil now has had significant flooding, or even what this country, Kenya, where I'm speaking to you from, has just lived through in terms of terrible flooding. So with dams collapsing and all the associated catastrophes. So loss and damage is big, which is why that bill will become unaffordable if we do not hurry up and do the climate mitigation. So financing, solidarity financing, obligation financing in all forms, whether it's grant-based, private sector-based, etc. Climate investment is a smart investment. It's the smart way to ensure that we have a livable planet and that the profits that people would want and companies would want continue into the future. A climate unsmart investment is essentially a sure thing to a bankrupt country, a company, and a bankrupt planet.
What's your experience of dealing with the business community generally and the investors in particular?
I mean, we at UNEP, we run something called the UNEP FI, the UNEP Financial Initiative, that deals with and encourages the banking sector, including the sector from India, I should say. And they sign up, and you can read on the website which Indian banks have signed up, to seek to move their investment portfolio towards greener and cleaner investments. And from our perspective, that's a way. Nobody wants to, if your pension or mine, if you have one, or I have one, and I'm 20 years old, by the time I'm, God willing, an old lady, I would wish to still have a pension. So you would want to make sure that your investments are in something that will be paying the day when you are needing that investment. And so the point is making those shifts, doing them gradually, but also with determination to ensure that the portfolio becomes net zero compliant. We're working on the insurance sector in a voluntary network around the insurance, because these are massive, massive amounts of money, trillions and trillions of dollars. We're working with the banking sector, and we're working with the pension schemes that have signed up. And it's incredible how many companies, how many banks are actually looking at this, because their obligation to their shareholders, to their bank account owners, is of course to ensure that there is an interest,
right,
and that interest doesn't just disappear in terms of stranded assets. So we at UNEP are privileged to work with so many of these very significant actors, precisely to help shift portfolio towards cleaner and greener.
And finally, how is UNEP preparing for a climate unfriendly world?
For a climate unfriendly world?
I mean, that's the reality, unfortunately.
Look, obviously what we need to do is to invest massively in adaptation, because unfortunately, as I said, we have climate procrastinated, as I often say. We've not taken the action when we should. Remember that this convention, this treaty, was agreed in 92. A child born in 92 will be more than 30 years today. And so that is the story that we are journeying, right? And so that is why we have, had we done in 92 what we all knew we needed to do, but it was difficult. And so we keep kicking the can down the road, we would have been in a much better place. So yes, climate impacts are here and now, in the forms of fires, in the forms of declining harvests, in the forms of droughts, and in the forms of floods. And unfortunately, they will be ever more present. And as we are agglomerating in cities, as we move more towards urban settings, finding ways to ensure that the absorptive capacity to prevent flooding is there. And that means, and I go back to urban forests, that means protecting urban forests, irrespective of what other developments might be pushing and pulling for infrastructure, because it's that protection that will allow us to have the lungs of the city, but it's also that protection that would allow an absorptive kind of sponge impact. Similarly, coastal forests that break the winds, many countries, mangroves, protect them, don't cut them, and so on. Coral reefs, they break the waves. So investing in nature's infrastructure becomes very critical. Mm-hmm. And of course, avoiding and thinking about green, where today we might think about asphalt or concrete, because we need to absorb greater impact of water. The reality is that we are living above 1.1 degrees, and the reality is that the current NDCs will take us way above 2 degrees to around 2.7. So we need to see a very big shift in our level of ambition for Azerbaijan COP29. And meanwhile, we need to massively invest in adaptation. And frankly, investments in adaptation is also a very good way of ensuring good development, sustainable development, poverty reduction, etc.
It has been wonderful talking to you and getting a sense of how things are moving and how you're looking at it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks a lot.
We hope you like this program. This program is also live streamed on All India Radio and aired on community radio stations. We look forward to your feedback on our WhatsApp number 9818120554. For participation in this program, write to us at sustainability.karma@gmail.com. You may also connect with us on social media. This podcast is also available on podcast hosting sites. Looking forward to meet you again at the same time next week with a new episode and a new guest. Till then, goodbye from all of us. Sustainability Karma, a podcast series with senior journalist and editor Rajiv Tikoo on sustainable development, sustainability and ESG.